soil regeneration is everything that we do. We are dealing with a degraded resource on this farm, so everything that we do needs to be in an attempt to improve that resource. So I consider this to be a lifelong journey. We use life, I guess, to combat the things that we are currently facing.
Welcome to the 259th installment of Ear to the Ground, the Land Stewardship Project's podcast on family farming, sustainable agriculture, local food systems, and local democracy. I'm Brian DeVore, editor of the Land Stewardship Letter. Let's be honest, despite all the impressive innovations it spawned in American agriculture, the land-grant research system has not exactly been an ally of regenerative farming. In fact, the system's emphasis on input-intensive, industrialized crop and livestock production systems has resulted in some significant economic and ecological problems over the years. It's frustrating to watch the resources of all those labs, test plots, and classrooms focused almost solely on such a reductionist way of producing food. That's why it's so gratifying when an innovation emerges from the land-grant system that's actually not just one more way to boost yields of corn and soybeans, or a new twist on producing livestock in large CAFOs. Take, for example, the Forever Green initiative at the University of Minnesota. Forever Green is working to develop a variety of crops that can provide an alternative to monocultural plantings of corn and soybeans while keeping the soil covered year-round. During the past several years, the Land Stewardship Project has worked with other groups to procure funding from the Minnesota legislature for Forever Green. By helping to fund this research, members of the Minnesota legislature are acknowledging that the future of agriculture doesn't need to be completely wedded to ever-increasing corn and soybean production, and that there are advantages to borrowing from a plant's wild side when creating a viable agricultural crop. The scientists and grad students working on these crops represent a new, more holistic approach to land-grant science and outreach. Perhaps the most exciting crop to come out of this initiative thus far is a new form of intermediate wheatgrass. Intermediate wheatgrass was first introduced to the United States in 1907 as a forage, and in recent decades, groups like the Rodale Institute and the Land Institute have been experimenting with it to develop a grain and forage crop that would produce multiple economic and environmental benefits without having to be replanted year after year. Eventually, the Land Institute developed a type of intermediate wheatgrass with the trademark name of Kernza. In recent years, the University of Minnesota has been working with Kernza germplasm to develop lines that will do well in the climate and soil conditions found in the upper Midwest. This is exciting stuff. The bottom line is that Kernza represents a key step in developing the world's first commercially viable perennial grain. Innovation in regenerative agriculture is always exciting. But what I find particularly positive about Kernza is how farmers are picking up the baton from researchers and putting their own creative twist on raising this innovative crop. For example, consider what Caleb Anderson is doing. For the past 3 years, he's been attempting to boost the lifespan of Kernza on his southeastern Minnesota farm by utilizing an intensive form of managed rotational grazing. It turns out that although Kernza is a perennial, the older and more mature it gets, the more its productivity starts to wane. In fact, research and real-world results on other farms shows their productivity starts to slump significantly after the 3rd year. Anderson's hope is that by keeping the plant in its reproductive state through intensive grazing, he can extend its productive life well beyond 3 years. Anderson, along with University of Minnesota Kernza researcher Jake Youngers, described this research project during a recent field day sponsored by the Cannon River Watershed Joint Powers Board, Goodhue County Soil and Water Conservation District, the Forever Green Initiative, the Sustainable Farming Association of Minnesota, the USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service, and Clean River Partners. The farmer and the scientist gave their presentation while standing in front of Anderson's Kernza field, which looked to be thriving after 3 years of intensive grazing. After the field day, I talked to the farmer and the scientist about the economic and ecological potential of a perennial crop like Kernza. Caleb started out by describing the research project, what he hopes to learn from it, and how this ties into his hope to build a regenerative farming operation based on healthy soil.
Yeah, so the field that we're standing near is planted in 2018. So this is the 3rd year part of the study that we're looking at is the grazing effects on Kernza over time and how that affects the harvested yield of the crop. And one of the reasons why we're really interested in that is because we've recognized that Kernza has the potential to be a dual use crop, and not to say beyond potential. We've proved that it can be a dual use crop. And so in that, we are grazing the Kernza in the spring of the year, early spring, mid-April-ish. I forget the exact dates typically. So it's typically earlier in the spring. We're doing it in a replicated manner, 3 different paddocks, and we have some exclosure areas that we have for our controls. And so we're monitoring the effects of the grazing on the forage, the harvested yield that's in that area, and the amount of forage that grows in the exclosures and in the normally grazed areas and over time. So we've been doing that for 3 years. After the grazing in the early spring, it'll regrow, and we'll harvest it in late July, early August time frame. We'll take off the straw. We'll bale that off as part of the study, and that's been valuable to me to incorporate that into my nutrition program for overwintering cattle. And then we come back in the fall and we actually get another grazing opportunity. So the fields that we have here is 6 acres in size. The average herd size that we usually bring onto it is about 55,000 pounds of live weight. And we're on the field in the spring, anywhere from 4 to 6 days. In the past, it's been closer to 6. This spring, it was a little drier. We did shorten it up to about 4. And when we were on the field in the spring and in the fall, as part of the study, we are grazing more. This Kernza harder than we would typically graze. Our perennial pastures, and so we're utilizing a much higher percentage than we would normally do to, in my unscientific mind, to stress the plant and keep that plant in a reproductive state, because the older, more mature the Kernza gets, the less harvested yield that the crop will produce over time.
Okay. Yeah. Well, Jake. Yeah. What from your scientific viewpoint, what is it you're hoping to learn from something? Because you've been involved with Kernza from the beginning here in Minnesota, and I know we've got the Clearwater variety here. But what is it you're hoping to learn from this particular with the grazing and some of the other things that Caleb's doing here?
Yeah, just like Caleb described, intermediate wheatgrass, which is Kernza, was introduced to the U.S. as a forage crop, so it's got really high forage potential, and we know roughly how to manage it as a forage crop. But this is a brand new line. This was a line or a variety that's been developed for grain production. So our question is, can we still treat it as a forage crop or graze it in the same way that we used the old intermediate wheatgrass types that are designed for that were bred for that? Can we still graze these new grain type intermediate wheatgrass for Kernza and get the dual use benefits, get that forage? We want to look at how the animals respond when grazing this at different times, and then of course the effects of the grazing on this next year's grain yield.
And what about this idea of stressing it? Because I know it does tend to kind of fall off in production that third year, and we are in the third year here, although it looks really good to me. But is there something behind that you could maybe stress it and kind of extend it over the years?
Yeah, definitely. And the project wasn't necessarily designed to see the really long-term effects of grazing on prolonging grain yields, but we're witnessing that potential now. So this was a 3-year project, and it's due to be wrapped up. We hope we can continue it and see if that phenomenon of stressing the plants with grazers can keep grain yields up. So it's pretty exciting, something that we've observed that we didn't expect to observe.
Yeah. Well, I think both of you took us through, and I wonder if you could take us through this again. Which I find really interesting is getting multiple economic benefits over the course of a year. Kind of take us through that year. What if you had this system in place, and you haven't been doing it the last 3 years, but kind of how many crops, quote unquote, are you getting out of this? I mean, through a system like this where you are grazing it a couple times a year, that kind of thing.
From the first crop, in quotation air quotes here,
Yeah.
is the grazing. So really looking at the benefits there of because we're grazing it in the early spring. It's right at a time where a typical grazer might be tempted to move cattle out onto perennial pasture too early. And the beauty with this crop is hey, let's get out and stress it at that time. So we get the opportunity to pull them off stored feed from a long winter and start grazing. So it's a beautiful thing for someone that has some land and cattle that looking for some options to reduce their stored feed costs. So that's how the spring grazing I really attribute to stored feed savings. And if you look at that, I mean, from a high level, you can spend, and prices vary, but you could easily spend, if you look at a 1,000-pound bale of hay, $150, and the herd that I just described would consume about 1,500 pounds. So if I can save 4 to 6 days of feeding hay. Now, keep in mind this is a smaller plot that we have here, but if it was expanded out to something larger, you could potentially have a couple weeks of stored feed savings that would translate into some thousands of dollars in savings just on the spring grazing. And then I think the economics on the grain speak for themselves. But the point that I'll add there is that being of perennial nature, we're not having to go out and plant that crop. This particular field, there's really no inputs on the crop other than we do a liquid manure application from a local dairy farm post spring grazing and post fall, and that comes at a significant bargain that time of year. And then the fall grazing, it's similar economics to the spring. However, I see it a little bit different. I use it to let my cool season pastures rest and stockpile, and then after frost, post frost, I try to go out and so basically giving rest for other areas of land.
So we're at July 28th. You're going to harvest the grain in a couple weeks. Then you'll get the straw off of that, and you can use the forage. So you're kind of getting 4 crops off of that, 4 quote-unquote crops.
Yeah, thanks for the reminder. So the straw, as I said, the first year on the 6 acres, we harvested 36 bales of straw with a relative feed value in the high 60s, low 70s. Last year, it was around 22, 24 thousand. These are 1,000-pound round bales. Looking at, that same value that I provided earlier, now with a lower relative feed value, the cost of that bale is going to come down a little bit. But even if you were conservatively saying at $50 a bale in value, times 36, you can do some quick math on a 6-acre plot and realize that there's some real economic benefits there as well. And we've incorporated those, we call it straw, but I've actually incorporated it into our winter feeding program. We'll feed higher quality hay bales in conjunction with these lower quality but still good quality bales to extend and reduce our winter stored feed costs.
And you did a nice comparison. Like you've got a field of corn across the road here, and kind of comparing that per acre kind of thing. Roughly, this could really work out compared to the corn as far as your kind of return on investment, it sounds like.
Yeah, from a, I like to think or I consider myself a low input kind of guy, but the perennial nature of this crop has been almost a no input. So, very, very low inputs required once you establish a crop. And as we've even touched on, we're seeding the crop at 11 to 12 pounds per acre. And, so even if that was at $10 a pound, which I think it's not even that high yet, the cost to input is very reasonable to establish, and then no labor, no other inputs throughout the year. These last 2 years, then being a perennial in nature.
Jake, just kind of looking at the bigger picture, because we have a lot of folks here kind of interested in water quality issues. The Cannon River is right here, and we had a great visual here. A pit shows that the roots going down at least 5.5 feet deep. I think they got tired and decided not to dig because it's one of the hottest days of the year. So who knows where those roots end? But that was a really good lesson in not only the depth of the roots, but the kind of the mass, how it kind of whatever. So talk about that. I know you've talked about that before, but we're getting benefits that go well beyond this farm when we have a system like this kind of going.
Yeah. The Kernza has huge potential for water quality benefits. There's really two ways it does that. One is the groundwater, which is our drinking water. It's where most of our communities in Minnesota get the drinking water, is the groundwater. And we're seeing more and more issues with nitrate contamination of the drinking water because of the leaching of the nitrogen into the groundwater. And we've done a number of studies now that are very, very conclusive evidence that the Kernza is reducing that nitrogen leaching by more than 90% compared to our annual crops. So there's essentially no nitrogen leaching through these soils anymore. And that's because of that deep, dense root system that we saw today. And then the Kernza can also hold the topsoil. And when the topsoil erodes away and washes into our surface waters, it takes with it phosphorus. So that's another major nutrient problem that we're facing. So the Kernza can help mitigate that issue, that problem, because it holds onto the soil. We don't have to till the soil every year and loosen it up, and it's not as easily blown away or washed away.
Mm-hmm. And I think what really struck me was soil scientist John Beck was talking about how, I don't know, in the first couple inches, you can maybe, when you're building that organic matter, you can get 10 inches, you can take in and store a 10-inch storm event. But by getting that root system, that means that's another 10-inch storm event, which we're seeing more of those with climate change, even deeper in the system. I mean, that must be exciting, both from a water quality point of view, but for Caleb, for you, man, we're in a dry year right now, and it's nice to know maybe you can tap some of that water.
Yeah, from my perspective, any drop of rain that falls on our farm, we want it to stay on our farm. If we have overland flow of water, we've already lost the battle.
Mm-hmm.
So anything we can do to improve our soils and have that deep root system that's attractive to me, and that's something that we're going to explore.
Kind of trying to make that connection. This whole idea, I know, Caleb, you're very dedicated ever since I've met you to regenerative agriculture, not just sustainable, but you want to regenerate this land. And some of the things that the soil scientists are talking about is you can, through systems like this, not only bring it back kind of overcome some of the damage to the land in the past, but maybe even take it one step further and improve it a little bit. That must be kind of exciting to be involved with research like this and see that it is on a practical basis, can be done. But also, Jake, I'd like you to talk a little bit about how this idea of environmental mitigation, that it isn't just always trying to keep us at a certain, not doing any more damage, but maybe going one step beyond a little bit.
Well, yeah, as I mentioned earlier, and as you've summarized, that soil regeneration is everything that we do. We are dealing with a degraded resource on this farm, so everything that we do needs to be in an attempt to improve that resource, that being our farm. So, and the biggest reason for me is I want to leave this land in a better condition than it was given to me, and hopefully my kids have that same passion, and we can continue to through the generations have a farm that is even more thriving than it is today. So I consider this to be a lifelong journey, and somewhere where we use life, I guess, to combat the things that we are currently facing. Those are the high level philosophies and operating principles of our farm.
Farmers are the dominant stewards of most of the land surface on the planet, and a lot of times farmers are in some ways demonized for the things that happen on the land, but here's a way for farmers to actually improve the land, and they want to improve the land. So that's what's really exciting. I think providing farmers tools to improve the land, make it better than it was before they got there. And that's part of the mission of the Forever Green Initiative and what we're doing at the U.
The last comment that I wanted to say is, one of the biggest challenges that I see is to have, to have that diversity option. And that's what I really appreciate Jake and the team at Forever Green to helping us, as farmers, have more options. Kernza being one of them, but they're working on a number of other options, and so it's really exciting. I think it's a really exciting time to be in agriculture, and we need more money to be invested in this initiative and this team, so we can do more, develop more product or crops like this, and give farmers more options.
Ear to the Ground episode 229 describes how pioneering organic farmer Carmen Fernholz is integrating Kernza into his cropping operation. For a link to that podcast and information on the Forever Green Initiative, as well as other resources related to intermediate wheatgrass, check out the podcast page for episode 259 at landstewardshipproject.org. If you have suggestions or comments about this podcast, contact Brian DeVore at bdevore@landstewardshipproject.org, or you can call 612-816-9342. By the way, it helps us greatly if you can give Ear to the Ground a rating on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, or whatever podcast platform you utilize. Thanks to Laura Borgendale, a Western Minnesota musician, for Ear to the Ground's theme music. And a special thank you to all of Land Stewardship Project's members who make initiatives such as this podcast possible. If you're not a member, visit landstewardshipproject.org to learn how you can support LSP. Thanks for listening.